Hey guys, how are you doing? Now let's review Mary Skelter games. So far the 3 games that have been released: Nightmares, 2 and Finale. As usual, I'll be talking about its story, gameplay, graphics and music. Just prior to begin, I want to say that this game is something like an amalgamation between Chrono Trigger, The Evil Within, Super Princess Peach and a little bit of Japan to spice things up. It tends to balance things between full of hope and messed up stuff. Also, I am not going to go super deep in details, otherwise this video would be insanely long. So let's begin with the story, starting with Skelter 2. This is the first game that you need to play to get the true ending in Nightmares, and the beginning of both the games is quite similar. It starts with a cinematic saying that there was a city in Japan that suddenly went really deep underground, and in the process it took an outlandish environment, known as the unescapable living prison jail. The details of how this happened are not explained in the main game, but you can find little light novels as bonus stuff, where they explain in detail what happened prior to make a living hell out of this city. Once this cinematic is out of the way, the game presents us with the main characters of this story: Otsu, Little Mermaid and Red Riding Hood. But this story is much more focused on the first 2 characters. Along the way they get their designated meet with Alice and Jack, and that's where things may seem like they are going to make a turn for the better. However, shit happens and after an incident Jack is one step to die. But his will to be alive kicks in, and due to the circumstances and the kind of breed Jack is, well, he ended up turning into a nightmare. These are the main bosses in this game, but I'll explain that later in its gameplay. And so that's how our group starts this hellish adventure, which is a spiral to sadder and sadder situations. In Nightmares, something similar happens, but remember that this game has different loops in time. The thing is that in this story we start with Red Riding Hood, Alice and Jack in a similar fashion. Red releases Alice and Jack out of the cell they were imprisoned. Along the way, while escaping, they find a nightmare, a creature basically invincible. Nonetheless, our trio is able to escape and assess the situation, but Alice, due to the accumulated corruption, entered into a state known as Blood Skelter. Here, a little parenthesis: all these female characters are known as Blood Maidens, and once their stress level reaches a certain point, they turn into a Blood Skelter, which is basically a machine that doesn't identify between friend or foe. After Alice turned into a Blood Skelter, she injures Jack, but Jack's blood was able to turn Alice to her original state. This was a great news because up to that moment, no one knew a way to turn back from that state. And that is pretty much how this adventure starts. And for the 3rd game, once we get the true ending in Nightmares and the whole team is together, we start the adventure. As usual, everybody getting wrecked. And once again, this nightmarish spiral starts all over again. And that's what I meant with this game being something like The Evil Within and Super Princess Peach. There are times full of hope, and there are many other times full of sad moments. There is no other way to say it, but that's what keeps the story really interesting. Evaluating each story, I will say that Skelter 2 is a 9, Nightmares and Finale 8.5. This game tends to explain many things really well in the light novels and along the whole game. Some are never really explained, but that is also cool, to keep things up to everyone's imagination. My main complaint here is that the stories are so filled with many details that keeping track of all of them is quite hard. But once you get near the end and you make an assembly out of all of these chunks of story, it makes a lot of sense. In Nightmares, the ending was not precisely the best. Perhaps up to that point it was a bit too much filled with hope, and in Finale they didn't explain some things in a solid way. I like to keep things up to everyone's imagination, but it magically tried to add stuff, and that made open many gates. However, the nice thing that I love so much from this game is that you don't need to play Nightmares or Skelter 2 to catch up to the story. Finale contains every detail that happens in both games, along with the novels and many other things. That is something that you don't see many times. All of these games also have a cool voice acting in both languages, Japanese and English. Just they messed up Snow White's voice in Finale because it has a lower volume than the other characters, but that is just in its normal gameplay. Once she has to talk in an important thing in the story, she sounds good. For the gameplay, they are pretty much the same. They are first-person dungeon crawlers where you have a squad of 5-6 characters and you need to traverse these dungeons. The level design of the first two games is quite simple. Some people say that these dungeons feel like they are too long, but to be honest, the levels are not that much of an issue. You can pretty much end each dungeon in a couple of hours if you have some experience in this genre. The third game is where it goes so freaking hard. These are the ones that feel like a never-ending hell. If we compare the three games, the first two are child play, but just look at this mess. I don't have that many comments from the first games. You just progress with specific Blood Maiden's abilities and that's it. Maybe Skelter 2 is a bit hard due to the things that you need to keep track, but the third game is just so complex that it is genuinely hard to track every single detail. And getting lost is easy as heck. The thing is that as you start these dungeons, they are not that complex, but as you fill all these squares, sometimes you miss a door or a little dumb thing to progress, and it becomes much more complex as you need to advance with 3 parties at the same time. We have the classic random encounters. At the beginning they are okay, I had no issues with it, just in Nightmares. Near the true ending, it was increased like crazy and in an annoying way. One step and one encounter, another step and you get another encounter. The advantage is that you can pretty much save a lot of times and almost everywhere. For the combat system, it is kinda complex because you need to keep attention to the corruption level of each Blood Maiden. Otherwise they turn into Blood Skelter and they can either obliterate your whole party or the enemies. Sometimes it can be unforgiving, as one character turns into a Blood Skelter and then she kills one party member, increasing the corruption level of another character, and so on, making something like a chain reaction. Controlling this is quite hard in Skelter 2, in Nightmares and Finale is much easier. One thing that I love so much are the boss fights, because Nightmares move forward in an arbitrary way, so if you take a lot of time to make a decision, they are going to relentlessly attack your party. This mechanic, in my opinion, was really hard in the first game. Some bosses were unforgiving. For the character development, each Blood Maiden has different jobs, and you can combine skills between all these classes. There are many more systems, but you don't really need to go that deep into all of this. In summary, I'll say that all of them are an 8.5. They have the respective mechanics that turn the game in an interesting thing, and Finale having to progress with 3 parties at the same time is a lot of fun. For the graphics, this is where these games could be improved a lot, because they reuse enemies like there's no tomorrow. You are going to get a bit tired of watching the same enemies over and over and over again. They have cool designs, but after you have explored the first floor in every dungeon, you have basically seen all you are going to fight. The dungeons in the first 2 games are okay, they are interesting and filled with details. The last game is where they went a little bit overboard, because due to the size of the dungeons it feels like they paste the same feature again and again, and it can be a bit tiring to watch the same stuff for long periods of time. Another thing to point out is that in Finale, if you play the Switch version, the Salvation Tower looks too much reddish compared with the other versions. On this end, I'll say that Nightmares and Skelter 2 are a 7 and Finale is a 6.5. And last but not least, the music. All I have to say is that I love their OSTs a lot. In my opinion, Nightmares has the best, then Skelter 2, and finally the last one. These games have some of the combat tracks that I could listen for hours upon hours, full of energy and really interesting. Also, the boss tracks are on point, with all the things that happen in short periods of time. Those tracks are just amazing. The dungeons at first felt a little bit on the weird side, but after playing for a while I got fond of these tracks too. They go all around with interesting tunes. In finale, the best part is that last freaking dungeon. The whole soundtrack up there is just really good. Prior to that, I will say it is decent. In summary, Nightmares is a 9.5, Skelter 2 is a 9, and Finale is an 8.5. The final score of these three games are Skelter and Nightmares 8.3 and Finale an 8. They are definitely good games, maybe a bit too long if you want to play the three of them. Nonetheless, they are worth it. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.